And now for the great news of today. We have Susan Strauss. This is continuing our new series called Forging Paths Toward Justice, Peace, and Earth Care. How do we make pathways? How do we travel those pathways? Susan has chosen her topic as Story Can Do, Experience, Morals, and Tricksters in the Age of Distraction. And Susan, we are so glad to have you here. Let me say a little bit about you for the benefit of all these folks. Susan spoke at a conference in Claremont earlier this summer, and she had us mesmerized with her stories. She is a person who thinks deeply, who cares deeply for the fate of the earth and the fate of all living beings on the earth. Including the living beings of rocks and soils and rivers and streams. Susan is a storyteller of natural history themes, and she's given performance in many places. You can read some of those on the screen, and I'll read a few. Performances for the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, most national parks, including a video on a wolf in mythology for Yellowstone, U.S. Botanical Garden, Royal Botanical Gardens in Edinburgh, Sydney Botanical Gardens, and she has taught in nature schools. She is and has been an advocate for what is called TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, for decades. And she has taken this early curiosity of hers to study scientific principles of natural history and has been especially interested in what indigenous mythologies reveal, both about natural history and about world cultures. She started her work by researching and telling Native American traditional stories, and she expanded to tell stories from Chinese, Japanese, Nordic, Greek, German, Hasidic, Sufi, Central and South American, and African stories. She has given performances on mythology of wolves, coyotes, bears, frogs, birds, trees, plants in general, and she's currently developing more on the theme of water and marine life. I'm giving you these details because she has so much inside her. Her books include, and this is just a sampling, Coyote Stories for Children. I mentioned that one because at the moment, the place where I live has a great many coyotes living and alongside small pets. So coyotes have gotten her attention. She's also written The Passionate Fact, Storytelling in Natural History and Cultural Interpretation. And When Woman Became the Sea, Ellie and the Pandemic. And finally, in 2022, Tree with Golden Apples. Her books are fun to read. They're fascinating and to read over and over again. But best of all, Susan, we have you here in person, and you are such a thrilling, deep thinker. We are really lucky to have you. So it's all yours. Take it away.
Gosh, thank you so much. This is a little strange for me because I like to be in person. So thank you so much, Mary Elizabeth, for such an impressive introduction. Let me go right to the heart of the matter here. We're all gathered today to find some strength and some direction for this very demanding time we're living in. And of course, the destruction of nature is a part of what is so demanding about this time. So when I say that stories can do, it's I've lived my whole life with the message coming from American culture that story doesn't actually really matter. And so, what I want to think very clearly about what and how story matters. In my book, The Passionate Fact, I spoke about, I have one chapter that says, the moral to the story and other false ideas about what story does. So, in the ancient world, stories were almost always connected to religious teaching, to moral education. And we are sort of, you could say, we're living in a almost strangely immoral, very immoral time. So I would say that telling a story thinking that the moral to the story is going to have some power or effect on people is somewhat of a lost cause. We are bombarded by stories in the media every day, which makes a story a much weaker form than it's ever been. And so, what I would like to urge people today to think about is how your personal story is important and how to tell it with power. How to use that story to hold yourself in strength, to remind yourself and the things that you value, and also to begin to practice the skill of telling a story in a brief way that can make an impact. And so we have these two ideas that there is story and there is experience. And everyone has a great library in themselves of experiences from your working life, experiences from your political life, and how to to find those stories that are still bugging you, still itching inside of you, and how to translate those stories into something that you can share with power. Um, I spent most of my life, as Mary Elizabeth explained, um, really learning a lot from traditional stories. And although most people today don't tell traditional stories, I think there is a lot we can learn from them. So I like to begin right off the bat with a traditional story from Oregon, from the Wasqu people of Oregon. This is a story that I found in a collection of coyote stories. And funny how I'm going to go back to the very first stories that won my heart, and those are traditional Native American coyote stories. I want to bring those because I feel in this time in which we're living, the trickster character has a lot to teach us. The thing that is wonderful about coyote stories from the Northwest where I live, that makes them different from coyote stories from the Southwest is that coyote is a heyoka, a fool who does everything wrong and therefore is a teacher by doing the opposite of what is viewed by the culture as being correct or proper. Coyote does just the opposite. Everyone gets to laugh at Coyote and think about what a fool he is, but then get the morality slips into you. The Coyote becomes what we can say a sacred fool, a mirror of ourselves. But also in the Northwest, Coyote stories, traditional Coyote stories are also coyote brings good things into the world. So I like to say that everything we have to endure in life and everything we can enjoy in life was brought to us by Coyote. We could say the Coyote is a kind of a yin yang of morality. So I like to bring you this story from the Wasqu. The Wasqu are people that now live on a reservation just north of me. But traditionally, they traveled up to the Columbia Gorge, the Columbia River, and out to the Oregon coast. Coyote stories often begin with Coyote as a traveler. Coyote is always traveling, I like to say, making his tracks, 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 tracks. And in the language of so many people of this region, they'd say, Hitolaitsana, Itsiaya. It means he was going on his way. Coyote. I love that word for coyote. Itsiaya. Hitolaitsana. Itsiaya. And Coyote was traveling far, far over the great Cascade Mountains and through the wet Willamette Valley. Coyote made his tracks, 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 all the ways over the soft Coast Range Mountains and down, down near the shores of the wide open Pacific Ocean. And there along the beaches of the Pacific Ocean, Coyote saw a long line of animal people standing there. And they were staring out at the Pacific Ocean. And Coyote came up to the last one in line and he said, hey, brother, why are you standing in this line? And you see, Coyote, he referred to this one who was Grizzly Bear as his brother, because we are all relatives. And Grizzly Bear, he spoke, and he said, oh, we do not want to be standing here. It is that woman. She makes us stand here. So Coyote, he made his tracks, 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 tracks further up the line. He passed all kinds of animals, far, far up the line. All the people standing, staring out at the Pacific Ocean. And when he came to the front of the line, there he saw her. At Lecha. At Lecha. Like she had seaweed for hair. At Lecha, she had dead fish and crab claws hanging on her clothes. And at Lecha, she had so much power. She would take one person at a time, one animal, and she would tie them onto a cradle board, and she would throw them out into the Pacific Ocean, and then she called to them, "Go forever." And they would go out tied to that cradle board. And after some time, they would come back, the cradle board drifting in the waves. Bones was all that was left of them. And then it was time to take the next one and tie them onto the cradle board. In their hearts, they wanted to move themselves, but she had put her power on them, and they could not move themselves. And she took them, she tied them onto a cradle board, the board we carry newborn babies on. And then she threw that one out into the Pacific Ocean, and she called after that one, "Go forever." Coyote thought. He used that power the Creator gave to him, the power of his imagination. He was busy thinking. Said Coyote, "I know just what to do about a monster like this. I'm going to run away." Thought Coyote, "I cannot run away. Soon the human beings will be coming, the two-leggeds, and they cannot live in a world with a woman like this." So Coyote used more of his power, the power the Creator gave to him, the power of his imagination. And Coyote said, "I know. I will do what I can do best. I will brag about myself." And Coyote went to the front of this line, and he began to brag about himself. He said, "Hey, it is no problem to be tied onto a cradle board and thrown out into the Pacific Ocean and come back alive. Anybody could be tied onto a cradle board and thrown out there into the Pacific Ocean and come back alive." Well, she began to brag herself, how she could go out there too and come back alive. And as she was bragging, Coyote said, "Good. If I go out and come back alive, then you will have to show us that you can go and come back alive." So Coyote made this little bet with At-At-Leha. And he tied her onto this cradle board. She tied him onto this cradle board, and she threw him out into the ocean, and she called after him, "Go!" And as Coyote was going out, why, in their hearts, all of the animal people could see that this was their last chance. And from their hearts, each of the people raised up their own voice. And their own voices came up together, and they formed one great voice. And they all together called out, "Come back, Coyote!" And then They had to wait. They watched. They waited. This is the slow part of the story. They they had to wait and they waited. And they waited. And finally, someone saw. It was. It was Coyote. He was standing on the cradle board, kind of like a California surfer. And he came riding up onto the beach. And he took Attila and he tied her onto the cradle board and he threw her out into the Pacific Ocean. And all of the animal people, realizing their power, they all called together, "Go forever!" Coyote, he said, "and don't bother coming back." And you see, to this day, she has never come back because none of our women are like this one. But it is strange, for still today, people go to the Pacific Ocean. You will see them there. Some are walking their dogs. Some are walking with friends. But you will always see a few people standing there and staring out at the Pacific Ocean. And nobody really knows why. Tracks, 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 tracks. He delights on. He went on his way. Itziai. Okay, there is a story. Perhaps you can feel how that story helps us today. Old story. This story was probably, we could say maybe the earliest recorded um, anthropological digs in the Northwest date back to 30,000 years ago. So people then had a material culture 30,000 years ago. I'm sure they had a story culture too. I want to keep going and tell you a personal story that happened to me. So maybe you can feel already in the traditional stories how powerful the pictures of the stories are. I think this is the first thing for me, is the meaning of the story is strong, but the pictures are equally strong. We have to remember that traditional stories were functioning in culture long before there was written language, or certainly long before there were books. So people remembered stories through sound and through picture. I was asked to tell some stories for a conference on water, and I realized I had this story floating around in my life experience, and I want to share it for you right now. In my early years as a storyteller, I used to visit with a Lakota teacher, friend of mine, and he invited me to the Sundance. There was a Sundance that was held up at Mount Hood, even though the Lakotas are from the Great Plains of the Midwest. But there were a lot of Lakotas living in Portland and who were suffering under the abuse of drugs and alcohol. And DeVere Eastman, he decided to bring the Sundance to Mount Hood to help clean people of their addictions. And he invited me to this Sundance. I remember it was funny how it was on the fourth year that I came to the Sundance that all of us who came to support the Sundance, all of us who stood in the great arbor that was built around the center where the great tree of life was, where the people who were sundancing, who were tied from their skin to the tree of life by a rope, all of the sun dancers who were in the center of the arbor were supported by those of us who were in the arbor, and we were supposed to make a sacrifice also to help support the sacrifice that the sun dancers were dancing with. And the sacrifice we were asked to bring on that fourth year was to not bathe with water. For the 4 days of the Sundance goes on for 4 days, and the Sundancers, they themselves were making a sacrifice. They were not to drink any fresh water for 4 days in preparation for the Sundance. And for the 4 days of the Sundance, of course, 4 days without fresh water, you could be dead. So they drank sage tea, bitter, bitter sage tea. And I thought I could do this, but I was raised in suburbia. So the first morning I got up, I just thought I'll bring a little bowl to the kitchen tent and I'll get myself a little bowl of water to throw on my face, for I was raised in suburbia. I was used to my morning shower. And as I walked along the pathway toward the kitchen tent with my little bowl in hand, a native man walked past me and he said, not even for your face. That's how the 4 days of the Sundance began for me. And if we were not dancing in the arbor to support our friends tied to the tree, why, we were going in and out of Sweat Lodge. And it always seemed to be my luck to go into a sweat lodge, and when it was time to go out, your face just dripping with sweat, they would push open the flap and I would crawl out. It just seemed to be my luck. There'd come a gust of wind and a whole bunch of dirt and sand would stick to the sweat on my face. So went the 4 days of the Sundance. And on the fourth day was the first time in my life that I saw a heyoka dancing. A heyoka is the sacred fool who does everything the opposite of what we should do. And well, all of the sun dancers, my friend Gloria was there, why, they all had their hair loose about their heads. And this man, why, he had his hair pulled up tight in braids. He looked kind of like Pippi Longstockings. The sun dancers had painted their skin with vermilion and mud to protect it against the sun. And he painted half his face white, and the other half of his face he painted royal blue. The sun dancers were all dressed, wrapped in red cloth and bare feet. Why, he wrapped himself in burlap, and he wore these bright white Nike tennis shoes. And all of the sun dancers on the fourth day, why, you could see my friend Gloria, her eyes on the horizon, dancing, dancing, keeping her mind on her prayers. And here came this Heyoka with a big bucket full of water and a bowl. And he would dance wildly in front of the sun dancers, dipping his bowl into the water and throwing the water up into the air. The water would fly up like some ice sculpture, some buffet in a restaurant. Like birds taking flight, the water would fly into the air and then would fall and be absorbed by the dry earth. The Heyoka, he danced wildly in front of the sun dancers, flinging water here and there, and sometimes pretending to drink the water from his bowl. But being a Heyoka, he would turn the bowl upside down, and the water would fall all over him. By the end of the 4 days, like the others, I slowly packed up my camp, got into my car, and drove back to civilization. Coming down from Mount Hood to Portland, I passed Mini Mart, Taco Bell, McDonald's, Mini Marts, McDonald's, Carl's Jr. on my way to my home. I fritzed around for a while. I had to substitute teach the next morning, and I knew I had to take a shower. But somehow I didn't want to wash the ceremony off. But I had to work the next morning, so eventually I made my way to the shower. I undressed and stepped into the cool flow of water coming out of the shower head. My heart sank like some old woman at the altar. I opened up my hands to catch the cascading flow of water. It felt like what a monk might feel with his begging bowl with a bit of weight in it. I opened my mouth to that flow, the cascading flow of water. It was like taking in a sacrament wafer made of crystalline snow. That water, it was like manna to me. Imagine that. Manna from a shower stall.
Susan, thank you. Thank you. We'd like to turn it back to you, Susan, to do some more storytelling.
Well, let me launch into this story, and please forgive me, it's not going to be as good as maybe some I've practiced for a period of time, but I want to launch into it because it's a story that has really, Robert Bly, the poet. I'm so sorry he's not on this plane with us anymore, but I loved listening to stories by Robert Bly. I don't know if any of you heard him tell stories, but he used to say that if a story starts to stick to you, you need to tell it. And so this story has been sticking to me. And let me see how well I can tell it. And also going back to the idea of origin stories, I do tell the origin story of the Norse, which I love somehow that story. And going back to the earlier questions and comments that people had, I was not able, I mean, my heritage is Dutch and Czech Jewish and German Jewish. I want to qualify that because I kind of carry the look of my Dutch Aryan part more than maybe, my Jewish, German, and Czech part. But I could never, it's interesting, I could never tell Norse myths early on in my life. I felt so much more connected with native stories until I was invited to go and speak in Sweden. And then walking around in forests in Sweden and working with people in the nature schools in Sweden, all of a sudden I was able to tell a Norse story. So I did feel, going back to this idea of the extra natural, we'll call it, that I distinctly felt when I was walking around in Sweden in the forest there that there were beings in the forest who were watching me. Feels pretty woo-woo, but it was definite. It was then I could understand how the indigenous peoples of that part of the world had many stories about trolls or fairies or beings, what Steiner calls the elementals in nature. Anyway, the force of nature as a being, as a being. So let me begin. Of course, the creation of the world, according to the Norse people, begins in this great coming together of opposing forces, almost a struggle that happens. I mean, the way I could tell it is that they say in the long ago time, in the ancient times, there was only a great yawning, a vast emptiness of space called Ginnungagap. And to the north of Ginnungagap was this realm of ice, Niflheim. And to the south of Ginnungagap was this realm of fire, Muspelheim, the molten moving rock, the 12 rivers of ice creaking and crashing into this great empty yawning in space. And the 12 rivers of molten rock and fire shooting themselves into the space. And it was not, I'm sort of telling the story now rather quickly because I want to get to the new part that I want to tell. But there was this great battle, and the Norse have a lot of battle in them, in their stories. So these two realms coming together was what began water. The first fire licking upon the blocks of ice became the drip, 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 the first pools of water in which first life began to form. And many, many things happened in this early creation time. One of the things I think is so beautiful is this seed that came from heaven to the earth and set out its three roots and became the great tree of life, Yggdrasil. And of course, the great tree of life, Yggdrasil, and And I want to add one little piece here as I'm just messing around in this story is that once my husband and I went to hear a very famous ecologist named Dr. Jerry Franklin, who was lecturing to us in a forest. We were all sitting on the ground, and he was towering above us, and he was raving on about forest ecology and how the early science and logging people got it all wrong, where they wanted to fertilize our national forests to grow trees faster. And he got very passionate in this moment, and he said, it's not what the soil does for the trees, he said. He said, these trees are like great solar collectors, and they are transmitting great sheaths of white light down into their roots. And that light stimulates that sugar that they collect, and they transform light into sugar, and that sugar is feeding this great multitude in their root systems that in turn, he's talking about the mycorrhiza, in turn feed all kinds of creatures and animals and other botanical life. And he said very passionately, it's like there was white light shooting through the tree into the earth. And I was blown away, because here was a scientist describing Yggdrasil's white light shooting down into the dark realm of the root system. So Yggdrasil, the great tree, was honored by Odin, the great All-Father, the wonderful All-Father, who did many things to become All-Father. He made many sacrifices. He hung himself on the tree of life. He hung upside down on the tree of life to perceive the runes, the secret sounds that through all of creation is made. He gave up one of his eyes. He became blind in his sight to gain inner wisdom. And he worked with two animals. He engaged their loyalty, their service, their devotion of two animals, his two friends, the ravens, Hugin and Munin, who became for Odin his real sight, who he sent out every day to gather the news from the world, their perspective from high above, and brought it back to him each evening. And he engaged with the one who is the hungry traveler, the one who is deep on the terrain, the one who tracks on the earth, the two wolves, Gire and Freke, and they, the ones who with their nose, with their incredible smell, can turn over rocks and release things under shrubs and bushes and grasslands and under fallen trees, and who know the secrets that are close to the earth. These two ravens and wolves, the ones who gave Odin his true wisdom, his all-father sight, and he understood the spirit of the tree of life, that not only was there white light there, but the dark dwarves who made this sweet mead, the mead of poetry, who in that early time slipped out from the roots of Yggdrasil, slipped out from Mimir's well of memory, slipped out as a small, fine spring. The mead of poetry slipped out and began to form itself as a stream. And that stream slipped out into the world, and they gave that stream, that small starting river, that water flowing forth, they gave it a name. They gave it the name Sok Vabek. Sok Vabek. And it was there near Sogvabek that Odin sat with Saga, the goddess of story, who would listen to the river, to the rhythms of its sounds, and would translate its stories for Odin. And it was through the drinking of this pure water, this sweet water, coming out from the roots of Yggdrasil, that Oden had that special speech, that twist of language that made him a poet, that was eloquent and simple and spoke from the heart to the heart, that made him the first poet. Oden was a great poet as well as a great all-father. All of these things were what made him be chosen by the Asir as their all-father. But then there was Situng, and we could ask what it was about Situng that he so desired to be the all-father. In jealousy, he would say to himself, I am as strong, I am as fierce a warrior as Oden, as any Oden. Why am I not chosen as the All-Father? That's how Situng would speak. But the Asir gods were suspicious of him. For one, he always bragged about his children. He always said, my children are the most intelligent. My children are the most beautiful. My children are more golden than the sun. My children are more silver than the moon. And so they chose Oden and not Situng. But he craved the mead of poetry so that he could speak with that language. And it was, strangely enough, his own son, Heike, who found where it seeped into the world, the stream that it seeped into. And because Mani, the goddess of the moon, craved to be filled, her body full of that magical elixir, that magical liquid, Heike, as a gift to her beauty, he captured in a flask a little bit of the mead of poetry and was going to carry it to her. But along the path, he was met by his father, Sutung, who demanded that Heike hand over the flask of the mead of poetry. But Heike, the son, refused. And what did Sutung do? He wounded his son. He cut him in the leg. He cut him to the bone. He cut his leg flesh open to the thigh, that you could see the thigh bone of his son. And even still, his son refused to give over the mead of poetry and brought it instead, managed to deliver it to the goddess of the moon. But Situng managed to trick it away, to steal it, to deceive her, and to snatch that flask. And for all of that, Situng was rejected by the Asir gods. He was condemned to leave their realm. And Situng went down below the realm of Hela. He went down below the molten, hot realm of Muspelheim. He went down into the dark fire mountain where all of the great giants were living. There, Sutung, he bargained, he made a deal with, now, give me a moment, I forgot his name. I'm getting it wrong. Sfigdur is the one, and he made the deal with Situng. Situng, he bargained and deal to give the flask, the mead of poetry, to the giants living in the fire mountain. Think what they could do with that. Think what the giants of the Fire Mountain could do with the Meade of Poetry. That's the deal he made. To give that mead, that precious mead, to Suttung in exchange for his daughter Gunlad to wife, to marriage. That was the deal. But all of this was seen by the ravens and the wolves, and they brought the news to Odin, and so he could travel quicker than Svigdur could travel, for he was on the back of his horse, Sleipnir, with her 8 legs, and fast on the back of Sleipnir, he sped out across the great Milky Way, where the winds were howling wild about him, where the stars in heaven were burning. And Odin found his way down the dangerous paths, through Hela, down through Muspelheim, down to the mountain of fire. And there he was met by the dwarf who guarded the only entrance to the mountain. And lucky it was that out of some cruelty of the past that Svigdur had inflicted upon this dwarf's brother, not even on himself, but on his brother, the dwarf decided to move aside, to not look and see who was passing there, and to reveal the opening to the great, deep path down into the Fire Mountain. And as Odin traveled down, he changed his shape into the disguise of Svigdur. And when he arrived, he announced himself. "Ha ha!" he said. "So I am here. Where is the wench that I am to marry? Where is she?" This is how he introduced himself to the giants all sitting around him, to make sure his belching and his barking and his bold bravado would make sure they did not discover his disguise. "Ah, forget the wench! Where's the board? Where's the food? Where's the beef? Where's the meat? The mead? Where's the drink?" And so the giants thought it was Svigdur who had arrived in their midst. And then the board was brought, and Gunlad to sit next to her husband to be married. And Odin, slyly, he spoke to her in measured, beautiful language. He said to her, "When I am home and I look into the sky at night, and I see a sliver of moon bright among the stars, I will see your face. I will see the moonlight twinkle of delight in your dark eyes." Oh, Gunlad, she had never been spoken to this way. And so at the table she passed the flask to her husband-to-be, for no giant had ever spoken to her like this. And Odin, he put his hand on the flask, and he took a sip. And at once she could see that his hand was now the talon of an eagle that held the flask tight. And when she looked at her husband-to-be, why, he had transformed himself into the great winged bird, the great eagle that flew up with the flask in his grasp above all those in the hall who were looking with amazement as he flew higher and higher, escaping the grasp of 100 hands of giants, flying higher and higher toward the hole bore into that mountain by Himdall. Himdall, the guardian god of Bifrost, the bridge between the worlds. Himdall, the builder, the fix-it god that every pantheon has. And Oden, as eagle, escaped their grasp. Out of the hole he flew and delivered the Meade of Poetry to its home in Asgard, to its source in Sokfabek. So it passed, and Oden sits with Saga. Often they sit together to hear what Sokfabek wishes to tell. Sokfabek, she winds her way around and about and over soothing, soft, wide stones as she wends her way ever onward, ever wider, ever deeper, over mossy rocks, delivering filaments of soil to bug, bird, and fish, nutrients for the world around her. And Saga translates the stories, the rhythms, and tells Oden of things that have passed. And they are refreshed, and Oden ponders the past. Sokfabek, says Saga, the primal fount in which life first found its form, through which all life was delivered into the world, with which all life finds new ways of becoming diverse in its forms, by which all life is nourished and nurtured, and to which all life returns when it is dissolved. Sokfabek, Sokfabek, ever traveling deeper. The story goes ever wider, deeper, ever onward. Now I left one part out.
You want to add that?
That is like actually a good part because when he's in the disguise of Situng, Oden, that I love to say that, and in moments his delivery, his performance, he loses a word and speaks in a finer word. Then the other giants say, "Huh? What he say?" Because of course, if you are a giant you cannot speak with any beauty in your mouth. Not even one word.
Wow. Susan, we cannot thank you enough for this day. You have been
Oh,
magnificent. You've, I, in your last story, you have revealed to us the ongoing process of stories and storytelling. And thank you for inviting us into that process. And during this time, which seems way too short, you have bound us, wrapped us in the wisdom of our ancestors. You have bound us with cultures that are not our own, but touch our own. You have evoked questions that will haunt us as we go forth. Questions that people have asked and questions that people are thinking. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now I'd like you to have the last word to say whatever you wish to say.
I'm just going to say, I mean, it's been on my heart strongly in the past couple days. All of the stories that I cannot interact with. I think that's the problem of our time when I think about the one gentleman who's living in Chicago and what is going on in Chicago or maybe next Boston or in Washington, D.C. And I heard that there were something like 100 Russians who were hiding in the United States because they had escaped from Russia because they didn't want to participate in the Ukrainian war, and how they've now been captured by the administration and sent back to Russia, which is like being sent to your death sentence because they're known as enemies of the state there. And one boy is the same age as my son, who's 24. And it was described that they flew them from Washington to Egypt and then a new plane from Egypt to Moscow. And that this 24-year-old boy cried all the way on the flight from Egypt to Moscow. And I think about him every day. And I wish that he can live in this incarcerated place where they're probably going to take him. Who knows what kinds of abuses he will face there. And I think about him every day as one story. And and well, I think I forgot what I was going to say now because I got all wrapped up in his story, but how important. And so I guess I'm wishing that out of his suffering, out of everybody's suffering, that there's something that we can nourish each other with. That we think about that. I mean, maybe that's part of the lesson of the Norse myths. But yeah, just to keep supporting and nourishing and finding our community in the stories that we share. So thank you so much, and I will be back. I will be back.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
You have been a real blessing for us.